Amelia Dyer's notoriety as one of Britain's most prolific serial killers stems from her grim activities in the late 19th century, primarily revolving around the cruel exploitation of Victorian society's inadequate welfare systems. Known as the Ogress of Reading, Dyer capitalized on the era's lack of social support for unmarried mothers, offering to take babies off their hands for a fee. Instead of providing the promised care, she ended the lives of these infants shortly after taking them in. This monstrous practice, known as baby farming, allowed Dyer to conduct her murderous operations under the guise of an otherwise socially acceptable transaction, hiding her heinous nature behind the veil of charity. The significance of understanding Dyer's notoriety lies in its broader implications on social reform and the evolution of child welfare laws. Her case illuminated the desperate needs of marginalized women and the vulnerabilities of children in Victorian society, sparking widespread attention and eventual legislative action. For instance, the Children Act of 1908, known as the Children's Charter, was partly influenced by the exposure of such atrocities, aiming to curb child abuse and provide better protection for minors. Additionally, Dyer's crimes underscore the critical necessity for stringent regulation and oversight in child care practices, a relevance that echoes in modern discussions about foster care and adoption systems. Examples that highlight Dyer's notorious status include the discovery of infant bodies in the River Thames, each wrapped in parcels with telltale evidence leading to her arrest, and the sensational trial that followed, captivating and horrifying the public. This trial was a pivotal moment that forced society to confront the ugly realities of baby farming and the neglect within public welfare systems. However, discussions of Amelia Dyer's actions raise potential controversies. Some may argue that blaming Dyer alone overlooks the systemic failures that facilitated her crimes. An alternative viewpoint might focus on the broader societal conditions that contributed to baby farming's prevalence, such as poverty, societal stigma against unwed mothers, and inadequate public welfare policies, framing Dyer's actions as extreme symptoms of a dysfunctional social system. Dyer's notoriety is not simply about her crimes, but serves as a vehicle to explore the interplay of social neglect, legal shortcomings, and the transformations in child welfare policies. Her case influences contemporary conversations on child protection and the responsibilities of society to its most vulnerable members, ensuring that history's grim lessons inform future safeguards. Amelia Dyer, often remembered as one of Britain's most notorious serial killers, has a life story that begins in the turbulent social context of Victorian England. Her early life and background are essential to understanding the development of her ghastly crimes and the factors that may have contributed to her murderous path. Born in 1837 in a small village in Somerset, England, Dyer was one of 5 children in a family impacted by mental illness. Her mother experienced vivid episodes due to typhus, which Dyer witnessed firsthand. This challenging family environment, coupled with the limited opportunities available to women in Victorian society, played a pivotal role in shaping her future. This background is significant in exploring how societal and personal factors can coalesce to produce a figure capable of such atrocities. By examining Dyer's upbringing, we see the broader implications of Victorian societal norms, especially concerning the treatment of women and the mentally ill, and how these contributed to an environment where unscrupulous individuals could exploit vulnerabilities. Understanding her early life offers critical insights into the economic and social constraints of the period that influenced her criminal trajectory. Specific events, such as Dyer's training as a nurse and midwife under the tutelage of a woman known for her own questionable practices, further illuminate her engagement in baby farming, a grim practice in which infants were taken in for a fee and often murdered for financial gain. The infamous murder of baby Doris Marmon serves as a grim illustration of Dyer's methods, wherein she lured desperate mothers with promises of care, only to end the infants' lives shortly thereafter. There are differing opinions on whether Dyer's upbringing could entirely explain her descent into murder, or if deeper, inherent psychopathic tendencies were at play. While some argue that the hardships and traumas of her youth were substantial contributors to her development as a serial killer, others believe that she possessed a natural proclivity for cruelty and malevolence, which might have manifested regardless of her early environment. Challenges arise in dissecting her early life against the backdrop of a society that was often indifferent to infant life, especially at a time of rampant poverty and lack of regulation in home-based childcare. These factors foster controversy, as they suggest that Dyer's acts, heinous as they were, occurred in a time when systemic failures provided cover for her actions. Her early life undeniably resonates throughout her criminal career, influencing her calculated exploitation of social weaknesses and her expert manipulation of a system rife with neglect and desperation, cementing her as a chilling figure in the annals of crime history. The baby farming industry in Victorian England was a grim and often clandestine operation that exploited the vulnerabilities of unwed mothers and impoverished families. Baby farms were establishments, typically run from private homes, that offered to take in and care for infants in exchange for a lump sum or periodic payments. In practice, however, many were thinly disguised fronts for neglect, abuse, and even murder, as operators often sought to maximize profit by cutting costs, sometimes with deadly consequences. The significance of the baby farming industry is deeply intertwined with the story of Amelia Dyer, who exploited this system to become one of Britain's most notorious serial killers. Dyer's actions cannot be understood without acknowledging the context provided by the Victorian social landscape, where poverty, lack of support for single mothers, and societal shame created a demand for such services. This environment allowed individuals like Dyer to flourish in the shadows, ultimately leading to the tragic deaths of numerous infants. Two real-world applications illustrate the lethality of baby farming during this era. First, consider the notorious case of Margaret Waters, a baby farmer executed in 1870, whose operations predated Dyer's but were remarkably similar. Waters' case highlighted the inherent dangers of the industry and triggered some public outcry, although little systemic change followed. Secondly, the inquest into the baby farming practices after Dyer's arrest in 1896 led to significant legal reforms, including the Infant Life Protection Act of 1897, aimed at regulating and monitoring childcare facilities. Opinions supporting the regulation of baby farming often focus on the need for greater oversight and legal protection for vulnerable demographics, particularly children, underscoring the necessity of societal and governmental intervention to safeguard human rights. Critics, however, argue that the demand for such services stemmed largely from a harsh, unforgiving societal structure that criminalized unwed mothers and gave them few viable options, suggesting that addressing root societal issues would have been a more effective approach. One challenge in discussing baby farming is separating fact from sensationalized accounts, a difficulty compounded by the sparse documentation from the era. Additionally, some contend that not all individuals involved in baby farming were malicious. A minority may have genuinely sought to provide care, but were hindered by lack of resources or support. The baby farming industry not only facilitated Amelia Dyer's criminal activities, but also acted as a catalyst for change, drawing attention to broader societal failures. This connection underscores the importance of understanding historical context in addressing social issues, highlighting the interplay between individual actions and systemic flaws. By examining this dark chapter, we gain insights into the importance of social support networks and the dangers posed by their absence. The onset of Amelia Dyer's criminal activities marks the beginning of her infamy as one of Britain's most notorious serial killers. This phase is critical to understanding the trajectory of her life and the subsequent horrors she inflicted. Amelia Dyer, a nurse by training, initially offered her services as a caregiver to infants. However, with the widespread social issues of poverty and illegitimacy in Victorian England, she exploited the era's lack of regulations surrounding adoptions and childcare, eventually turning to baby farming. This practice involved taking in infants in exchange for payments, under the pretense of providing care. But Dyer's operation was far more sinister. Rather than nurturing these children, she pocketed the fees and was responsible for their deaths, often by neglect or more direct means. This period is significant as it sets the stage for the dark and prolific nature of Dyer's crimes. The absence of effective child welfare laws and the prevailing social stigma against unmarried mothers created a fertile ground for her exploitative activities. Dyer's initial endeavors into baby farming were not immediately deadly, but they quickly devolved into murder, highlighting her role in exploiting vulnerable societal gaps. Specific examples that illuminate this point include Dyer's early practice of taking in an unwanted child from an impoverished mother under the assurance of proper care. Instead of providing that care, she would let the child perish through maltreatment. Another stark instance is how Dyer would reinforce her baby farming facade with forged adoption papers, deceiving authorities and preventing intervention. Critics and historians often argue that this period underscores the Victorian era's inadequacies in social and legal protections, which indirectly supported the rise of individuals like Dyer. Yet, some suggest that placing undue blame solely on societal failings overlooks Dyer's personal agency and moral corruption. The onset of Dyer's activities was not without challenges and controversies. Victims' families, deceived by her comforting facade, were left in the dark, and sporadic investigations either stalled or failed to piece together her extensive operation due to lack of coordination and strict legal frameworks. These challenges highlight the necessity for reform and more rigorous child protection measures, which eventually emerged in part due to the public outrage incited by Dyer's revelations. Overall, the beginning of Amelia Dyer's criminal activities doesn't just serve as a prelude to her later notorious deeds. It critically informs the understanding of how systemic failures can harbor individual malevolence, impacting legislation and public policy in subsequent years.